Tiffany here with Cheryl's Herbs. Today I'm with Alex from Tend and Flourish, and we're going to be talking about the importance of being mindful of the plants when we're foraging. So Alex, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Tell me, why is it important to have the proper identification?
Well, Tiffany, that's a great question. When foraging, it's very important to know exactly which plant it is that you're harvesting. And this is because it can be a matter of life and death, or getting a little sick, or just having a tummy ache. And then,
That's important.
Yeah, of course. You wouldn't want to pick out the wrong plant and assume that it's a different kind of plant. For instance, we have elderberries. They're a great plant. Well, they look a lot like pokeberries, which is a toxic plant. So we want to make sure that we know which one is the proper one so that we don't get sick while eating it.
So let's talk a little bit about the topic of herb lust. Why is that so important?
Sure. So herbalism and herbs have become very popular recently. And so it's really important to be mindful of which herbs you can easily devastate the stands or the ecosystems of. So we want to be mindful of choosing the herbs that we include in our daily routines. So for instance, something like dandelion, which is really common, it's a weed. Most people try to eradicate those out of their yards.
Yes.
They don't want them. Well, that's going to be a perfect herb for medicine and food that you can harvest in your own backyard.
So we got a chance to talk a little bit about the herb lust. Tell me a little bit about the habitat loss. How is that also being affected when people forage, or even with people's lifestyles?
Of course. Well, we have so many people on the planet now. We're building more structures. We're taking away land for agricultural purposes. We just don't have a lot of ecosystems that are still intact, like wetlands. There's less than 1% of wetlands left. So it's really important when we're going out and foraging to be aware of how to not only make less of an impact or no impact on the stand, but to propagate and sustain those plant stands so that we can use them for future generations and for our grandchildren.
Yeah, I think that's very important. We have to remember about future generations. And every time we deplete, then we take that away from them. So give me some common alternatives.
Well, always do your research whenever you're purchasing a herb. If it's a plant that tends to be endangered or like a plant that grows in the wetlands, well, there's going to be other great alternatives for those plants. So, for instance, something like golden seal. It's an endangered plant. It's a great medicinal herb. We have other options to use instead of golden seal. So we have Oregon grape. It's a much more common herb. Great alternative. It will protect our stands that are in the woodlands of the Midwest so that the golden seal can still prosper.
Perfect. I love that. So while we're talking about these different alternatives, let's now turn our attention to wildcrafting. What's a checklist that you would suggest? I think you mentioned a few, but what are some other things that you would give us as far as a checklist?
Of course. I think it's really important when you're going out foraging to kind of have a working checklist in your mind of things to be aware of. The first and foremost, we talked about proper identification. You want to make sure that you have the right herb so that you're not hurting yourself or anyone else. And then second of all, do you have permission to be collecting from that site? It could be someone else's land. It could be a state or national park. You want to make sure that you know the guidelines of harvesting in those areas so you don't get in trouble or you don't hurt the plant stands. They could be doing a restoration project in that particular area. And if you were to harvest those plants, it could, impact that spot. So we want to be very mindful when we're harvesting. And then also make sure you never take too much. You want to make sure that you leave enough for the pollinators, for the wildlife, to make sure the plants are repropagating and continue to thrive and grow so that you can return and come back to those places later.
Yeah, that really speaks to me, so I love that. Well, lastly, tell me a little bit about permits that we need when we go foraging.
Of course, that's something that you want to look into with each personal park or national park or land that you go to. So for a state park, a lot of the regulations are going to say that you can't pick there. So you need to be aware, you don't want to have your sack full of mushrooms or herbs or whatever it is that you're collecting, and then a official person comes up and says, oh, we're going to have to give you a ticket for that.
Yeah.
So making sure that before you go to a place and look into the website and see if you need a permit for collecting, then you can go ahead and move forward and collect at that site, or find someone that has land that you can go and harvest and wildcraft, and they don't have any issue with you being there.
I love that. Well, thanks for those suggestions. Maybe we can look a little bit. We have a few plants here on the table. Maybe you can tell me about some of these plants that we have.
Yeah, of course. So we kind of chose a handful of easy to identify herbs that are great options for wildcrafting and foraging for beginners especially. So this right here, we have nettle root, which is also part of the nettle plant. Nettle is a really common herb. It's weedy, and it's really well known for being high in minerals and vitamins, and it's just an overall great plant for your medicinal chest as well. And so it's going to be a really easy one to harvest and forage on your own or grow in your own garden. And then we have dandelion root right here. And dandelion is great for your liver detoxification. It's bitter. It's going to stimulate your digestion. Well, I'm sure we can all pick out multiple dandelions in our yards.
Yes, I know I can.
You can also use the above ground portions, the leaves, the flowers, everything except the little seeds that everyone makes a wish on.
Right.
And then we have plantain here, which is a really great herb to use for any kind of cuts. If you've got a splinter, a burn, it's going to be soothing for your skin. It's soothing for your digestion as well. It's going to be really easy to identify. It also kind of grows in cracks in the sidewalks and parking lots and yards and whatnot. And then lastly, Cleavers, which we have an extract of this one, which is really lovely. Cleavers is, maybe if you're a gardener, you're familiar with this herb. It tends to be a weed, and we love to pick it out. It has these whorled leaves, and it's really sticky, so kids love to pick them and throw them and stick them on their sweaters. It's a fun herb, but it's a really great spring herb for moving lymph, and it's a spring tonic. And so that's going to be an easily identifiable plant that people want to eradicate from their gardens. So why not use this as a medicine or a tea or an extract?
Yeah, no, I love it. I love you sharing these different herbs with us.
Yeah, and these are all very common. They're not going to be unethically harvestable, very sustainable, and easy to identify.
Okay, well, perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Alex. We appreciate having you here at Cheryl's Herbs. And you must check out Tend and Flourish with Alex and Crystal. Thank you.
Thank you.